Welcome to the latest episode of Sports Bazaar with my good self, me, Mick, Molloy, and Titus O'Reilly, who's bringing to the table something special for the month of September.
Yes.
Do tell, I'm all ears, what do you got planned?
Well, it's September, it's 2023, we're recording this, and it will be in this month, the 40th anniversary of Australia winning the 1983 America's Cup.
Okay.
And we are going to all September be looking at the history of the America's Cup and the lead up to that 1983 event. And it's hard, if you're under 40, it's really hard to understand how big a moment that was.
I have had this discussion, and where you talk about what are the biggest moments in Australian sport that you can remember. And I can go Kathy Freeman at the 2000 Olympics. Maybe some horse racing, a couple of Maccabi Divas or Far Lap back in the day. But I can't think of any day or event that galvanised this nation like the final race of the America's Cup in 1983, which had us all out of bed early, all gathered around the TV, and it was pandemonium.
It was, this is where famously Bob Hawke got up and said any boss that sacks a worker today for not showing up is a bum.
He's a bum. He put a jacket on over another jacket. At one point in the morning, he was wearing two jackets.
Yeah, he had that famous Australia jacket. And you've got in the story, you got Alan Bond, and we're going to get to that. That's not what we're going to do in this episode. Today we're going to really go back to why was it such a big deal.
You've got Alan Bond, you've got Ben Lexon, you've got
John Bertram.
There's so much to cover here.
You've got Bob Hawke.
You've got a Wing Keel.
Yeah.
You've got a stuffy New York Yacht Club. You've got a villain in Dennis
Conner.
It's just an epic tale.
And so when I looked at this, that this was the 40th anniversary, I thought, well, on top of that, let's go back into the history of it, because it's the longest ever winning streak. This is the New York Yacht Club retaining the America's Cup was the longest ever sporting streak. So Australia ended.
Yes.
It went for over 130 years. They
True or
retained
false
the cup.
that the cup was actually bolted?
It was actually bolted down in their yacht club because they'd had it for so long. They had a plinth and they had the cup, and it was bolted down. Because no one ever won it, right? They won it for 130 years in a row.
They did not anticipate losing.
So they did not, so this was the longest ever streak. So not only did Australia end this long streak, and it was just unimaginable to the Americans.
Yes.
So on the 30th of July, 1844, we even know it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, yes. On the schooner yacht, the Gimrak, which is owned by a guy called John C. Stevens. It's a huge yacht. 9 men meet to set up a club, right? And the club is the New York Yacht Club.
Wow.
Now, New York in the 1850s, New York's changing. It's starting to become more a financial mecca and less of a yacht, harbour, trade, cargo sort of one.
Yep.
And so the New York Yacht Club at this point could have just gone away completely, they reckon. But what happens in 1851, they get word that it's a big race is happening in England. So the New York Yacht Club hear this. It's a bunch of people are discussing. An English merchant comes over and says to a few of these businessmen, there's going to be a great exhibition in 1851 in London. And it's organised by Prince Albert, who's the consort of Queen Victoria. And the whole idea is it's an exhibition to show off how great the British are at technology and all these sort of things, right? Yep. It was a huge event at the time. And word gets back, and they say, well, that'd be interesting. We'd love to come over for that, right? So word gets back to England after this chat, and the Earl of Winton, who's the Commodore of the Royal Yacht Squadron, he hears about this new club over there, the New York Yacht Club, and sends them a letter and says, why don't you come over and enjoy our facilities, come over and compete in some of the regattas. We'll have a lovely time, celebrate Prince Alfred's idea and Queen Victoria. Why don't you come over and compete over here and bring one of your boats? The British are lords of the sea. They think these Americans got no idea. Yeah,
naval history
is
impeccable.
Yeah. They've just fought the Napoleonic Wars, right? They're like
flying high.
They're like, come over.
Come over. It works.
John Stevens, who's the Commodore, says, right, he forms a thing with 6 other guys. And he says, let's build a yacht with the intention of going over there to England and showing them how good we actually are.
They're like the Winklevosses.
They are.
All right, yep.
So he says, let's get to do it. So he brings together his brother, joins one of his brothers, a guy called Colonel James A. Hamilton. We'll get to him. His son-in-law, George Schuyler. We'll go into all of these. Another guy, Hamilton Wilkes, and a non-yachtsman called John K. Beekman Finlay. Now, all these guys are kind of amazing. John K. Beekman Finlay. Now, he's the nephew of a guy called John Beekman. He was a partner of John Jacob Astor, who, Astor you've heard of, most people would, who earned, he had the Astor Theatres, you've got hotels, you've got... Now, Astor made his money in the beaver trade, the fur trade. That's how he made his money.
He's a beaver mogul.
He was a beaver man. He was a beaver mogul. But Beekman went into partnership with him. They built the Park Theatre in New York. And he also, it says, describing...
That's still there.
Yeah, that's still there. And then describing John Beekman, John Beekman was described as one of the owners of the 19th century's most premier wine collections. Right? So he was this kind of guy. Now, he had an unhappy life later on because he was stricken with a digestive problem that meant he couldn't drink his beloved wines.
Oh, this world is cruel.
It's cruel, right? So he had the greatest wine collection in the world almost. He couldn't drink it. Right?
It's worse than not having the world's greatest wine collection.
He did not take it well. It was said he became a grim wine miser who refused even a sip to his relatives and friends.
If I can't have it,
no one. You're not having it. So he wouldn't give anyone any of his wine.
So what did he do with it? Just sits there.
He dies. He dies finally, and he leaves it to his nephew, John K. Beekman Finlay, who's the guy who's joined this syndicate, right? He's a young guy. He inherits his fortune. This is Finlay. He inherits his fortune and his wine collection, which hasn't been touched for years.
Oh, it's good to go.
And it was said that Finlay lost little time pulling corks at such a clip that it made him one of the most popular hosts of his day. James A. Hamilton, who's another member of the syndicate, he's the son of Alexander Hamilton of Hamilton the musical fame. So his dad was vice president.
Right.
So he is American royalty. Goes on to become acting Secretary of State. Goes on to become an advisor to all the top American statesmen of the next 50 years. So he's part of it. His son-in-law, George L. Schuyler, who becomes very important for the America's Cup, he's his son-in-law. They get along very well, but he's also the son of General Philip John Schuyler, who's a revolutionary, famous soldier. And he himself, George, owns steamboat lines and railways, and he's rich in his own right. So he's not like the loser son-in-law. He's a very successful son-in-law.
We're not talking about the idle rich here. We're talking about...
They're the active rich, right? This is the American can-do era of all that. They believe that their style of boats, which are New York pilot boats, could be very competitive against the British, because these boats, which are 80 to 100 foot long, have a reputation for speed because in their line of work, they are literally the ones that guide the ships into the harbour, the pilot ships. Yeah. The way the system works is the first to get to the ship gets the job. So you have to outrace every time the other pilot ships to get the job. So they're kind of having a race every day at work.
Like tow trucks.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like whoever's there first, speed is all that matters.
Yeah.
So they're used to building very fast boats. So the syndicate says, great, we'll go to there's a guy called George Steers who builds the fastest boats. And they go, whatever money you need, build us the fastest boat you can imagine, which he does. And it's christened America is the name of the boat. It's launched on the 3rd of May, 1851, at the equivalent of about $1 million today to build, right? $30,000 at the day.
It's an ambitious project. Let's call it America.
Yeah.
Bang.
So it's a schooner, which is a ship that basically has 2 or more masts. So it's not a single mast ship, and it's got multiple sails fore and aft at the back and the front, basically. We're not going to get into all the details. Now, when you think of a racing yacht now, you think of like a racing car that's stripped down to the bare minimum of weight and like that. These yachts were not like that. These yachts were luxury yachts as well as being very fast.
Right.
So they're big, huge yachts. They can fit 20 people on them as crew.
Yeah.
They can carry her in comfort. So the yacht, the yacht, had a 4-cabin that was huge. And it was the size of an apartment. On each side, it had china rooms. Right, had another room where it had 2 large staterooms next to that, had wardrobes and water closets attached.
A cellar?
Cellar, it absolutely had a cellar. We're going to get into that. Then at the front, it had a whole nother 2 staterooms, and it had washrooms, pantries, cabins. It could have another 15 people crew up the front. So you were talking about absolute luxury, right? Like brilliant. It is. According to the Customer of the Times, it said she carried a stock of liquor for regular consumption. Like, so it's not light, right? Yeah. They also hire a guy called Captain Richard Brown to be the captain because he is the fastest of the pilots that works in New York Harbour. So they have this guy. They got this fast ship with the fastest captain. They mean business, right? He'd gone from Brown, who was a poor man who just became so good at racing boats that he just finds his career just going up and up and up all the time, right? So he puts together his crew and they set off for France on the way to England. Now, they stop in France for 2 reasons. One, they need to re-rig after the trip across the Atlantic, which is still a very harrowing trip at this point in time. They arrive in France. They decide to dock in France and refit. So basically make sure everything's in top notch. And they want to do that. And they want to do that away from the prying eyes of the English. They don't want to do that in an English harbour.
The games have begun.
The games have begun, right? They don't want them to see the design of the ship because they're going into a dry dock. You know, they don't want them to see that. So they're already playing around.
Are the English taking this as seriously?
They just assume, the English just assume they're going to win. Yeah. Right? They're not even thinking of this ship coming over.
They're sitting around doing some snuff.
This will
be a bottle.
Exactly. They also stop in. James Hamilton explains that the other reason they stopped in France is, and this is a direct quote, "In Paris, we took means to obtain the best wines and all other luxuries to enable us to entertain our guests in the most sumptuous manner." A ship called the Laverock, a British ship, sees them and decides to engage them in an impromptu race.
Oh, it's like
so it's on from day one.
It's like at the traffic lights.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, guys.
So it sees that there's American ship showing up.
Bonnet?
Yep, and it's like, let's show you how to race. So they start racing. Now, the America has got French wine, beef, pork, bread, extra sails, everything. It's not rigged for racing.
Yeah.
And it's carrying everything. The idea is they get to England, they offload all that stuff, lighten the ship, then race. Anyway, they race and they win. America wins easily, even with all this stuff on it.
Wow.
The Laverock returns to Cowes in the Isle of Wight, which is where this regatta is going to be, and they talk and they say,
"Watch out!
This American boat actually belted us." So they show up, and Stevens, the Commodore, is going, right, we need to start having some races, and starts to try to set up races. The word goes out, no British ship will race him. So the race come all the way over from America because they think it's too fast. They all worried that they've all heard what happened.
That is craven.
So they all won't race him. So he says, let's make it a sum. Anyone that can beat our ship, it's to 10,000 guineas, which is the equivalent of about $1 million $1 million today. So he says, $1 million bet if you beat us. No one takes him up. So he's just sitting there off the Isle of Wight. While no one will race them, they are welcomed with open arms by the yacht crews and the yacht club, because the yacht club are all rich aristocracy.
Yes.
And they sort of welcome them. They see that they've got all the best French wine, so they're quite happy to hang out with them.
More than welcome.
So the Americans come ashore in Cowes, and there's officers and senior members of the Royal Yacht Squadron meeting them. Now, one of them is one of my favourite characters, the Marquess of Anglesey. He's 83 years old, and he greets them. And he's been a member of the squadron since 1815. And he comes aboard the America and looks around. Now, he is an amazing guy. He distinguished himself when he was a younger man as a cavalry commander, mainly in the wars against Napoleon. Yes. So he goes back a bit, right? So he's he's that. In 1815, during the 100 Days of Napoleon, he led a charge of the heavy cavalry at the Battle of Waterloo. It's a famous military charge, right? Yeah. One of the last cannon shots fired on that day hit him in his right leg. This is the Marquis of Anglesey, which subsequently had to be amputated. Legend has it that the Duke of Wellington, which was, who won the Battle of Waterloo against Napoleon, was close by at the time, and the Marquess said, "By God, sir, I've lost my leg." And Wellington replied, "By God, sir, so you have." Now, he's a keen sailor, the Marquess. And so he took a great interest in the America, the yacht that's shown up. He's looking at the America.
He's taking it seriously.
Yeah, because he thinks it's an amazing design. He suspects there's a propeller. But he's very into ship design because he'd always looked into sailing technology. After he fought at Waterloo, he came back to after the wars were open. The Marquess was a bit like, it's a bit boring this peacetime, so he took up sailing because he found it exciting. Right now, at that time he was always interested in what's the fastest ship, and he found out that the fastest ship was a ship called the Cutter. Now, the ship...
I've heard of this ship.
You would have heard of the Cutter. Now, the Cutter comes from Essex, the Colne River there. It's where the best yachting skippers and sailors at the time came from. The Cutter was designed to be just a very fast boat, much like the pilot boats in New York are designed purely for speed. This is 30 years before the New York boat. Now, what had happened is this had happened. The most notable men who designed them, there was a guy who was the best at designing the cutters, which is a guy called Philip Sainty. Now, Sainty he built these fast boats. He built fruit schooners and fishing boats that needed to have their perishable cargoes get to market very fast. He also built fast revenue cutters, which were the ones that were the government ships that chased down and caught smugglers. So Sainty's building these boats. No one's racing her, remember? No one will race her. So it's a bit embarrassing for the Royal Yacht Squadron that she's come all the way over here.
You invited it.
So they have an annual members-only regatta. On the 22nd of August, Queen Victoria has donated the prize, and they decide we're going to make a special provision that it's open to members of all nations. We're going to let America race in this regatta. So it's not a one-on-one race, it's a fleet racing. Sure. So... And they said, would that make you happy? And the Americans said, great, we'll race in that. It's called the 100 Guineas Cup. 18 yachts enter, 15 manage to start. And America starts this race. It's around the Isle of Wight.
Sure.
It's going to be like a whole day's racing, right? I think it's about like 90 kilometres that they've got to race. 98 kilometres it is. So America has a slow start. Its anchor won't work properly. It can't get off its anchor.
Right.
So it's behind everyone. But within half an hour, it's in fifth place and it's gaining, right? They are used to racing close to rocks and everything in New York Harbour, so they're going far closer to the rocks and the shore, cutting off distance to the British. But also, it's a very fast ship, and suddenly it doesn't take long, but they're in the lead, and everyone's like, "This ship is amazing." They pass the Royal Yacht, which is a huge yacht. It's like the length of an Australian rules football field. Like, it's massive, it's called the Victoria and Albert, and it has Queen Victoria on board.
On it.
And she's watching as the America passes in the lead. And
That's not going to go well.
They dip their ensign in respect and they doff their hats as they pass. The America crosses the line at 6 p.m, winning this race.
Here we go.
Legend has it that while watching the race, Queen Victoria, as the America crossed, asks who was second, and a dejected old salt sailor near her says, "There is no second, Your Majesty." Meaning...
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. We've been cooked. The America has won. The Marquess of Anglesey is so amazed by America's performance, he hurries on board after the race, and he's determined to see if there's a propeller.
Find the propeller.
And he leans over the edge and almost falls, except for Stevens, the American Commodore. He captures him on his good leg and stops him falling into the water. And the Marquess says, "There's no propeller. This is just an amazing ship. You've destroyed us." Now, the syndicate are so thrilled with this, and the America's put in a dry dock. Everyone can see there's no propeller.
They've hoisted the skirts.
Yeah, and everyone is... The English shipbuilders are like this design has shown us that we're old-fashioned in our thinking, and we need to compete with you on a better way. One of the builders from England said that the hull was perfection, and most of it, though, was the cut and material of the sails. So they're saying in England, the sails are handmade. They're those billowy big sails.
Right.
The American sails are machine-made.
Yes.
They're a completely different type of fabric. They're really tight, like modern. You know how modern sail, like almost like they're like a board.
Yeah.
This is what these were like. This is where that started. So they suddenly realized. Now, John Stevens and the New York Syndicate, 10 days after the regatta, to show you how proud they are of the ship, the America, they have they just sell it to one of the English straight away.
The boat?
They just sell the boat. They keep it for 10 days and go, yep, we'll sell it. Someone makes an offer and they sell it. There's no sort of, nostalgia for it
No.
It's like gone. So 10 days after. So they've only owned it for about 6 months from when it was built to when they sold it over. Very mercenary. So they sell it. The ship itself then has a fascinating history. It then just goes on to be sold amongst a few different English owners. Finally, it ends up back. A guy buys it in America, Henry Sotheby Pitcher. He rebuilds it a bit. He then sells it again to another American guy called Decky. And he sells the ship to the Confederate States of America. And it is a blockade runner in the Civil War.
There you go.
It's then captured by the Union Army and used as a blockade enforcer in the Civil War. It then becomes a training ship for the United States Naval Academy. It's renamed the America. It's had name changes and all this. And it was kept in the American Navy up until 1942, when it was housed in a shed which in a heavy snowstorm collapsed the roof on top of it, and it was eventually scrapped and burned in 1945. So it's the most famous one ever. What they are given is a trophy that they win. Now, this trophy is ornate sterling silver, and it was designed in 1848 by Garrett & Co., and it is what is the America's Cup.
What we see today.
So it was built in 1848. It's sterling silver, and that they've been given it the syndicate for winning this race in England. And it's worth a lot of money, and it's quite, prestigious. But they're all going, what do we do with this trophy? We've got this trophy, but they're having to pass it. It's like if 5 mates of you all share a trophy. You're not all living together. So, they've sort of got a custody roster. They're passing it around. Some of the members start to die off. They're old men, so it's sort of like, what are we going to do with this? George Schuler is one of the syndicate. He's talking to them about, what do we do with this trophy? And someone says, well, we should melt it down and make it into medals each, just commemorate our 1851 victory against the British. And he goes, I don't really like that idea. And him and Stevens, who'd been the Commodore, they'd been talking about, why don't we donate it to the New York Yacht Club as a trophy that international competitors can challenge for.
Right.
And it becomes an ongoing thing to promote international yacht racing. And they go,
good idea.
That's a good idea. So they decide to give the cup to the New York Yacht Club on June 8th, 1857. So it's 6 years after they've won this cup.
Are they members of this club?
Yeah, they're all the founding fathers.
They're the founding members,
too.
So it's a good idea. It's keeping it in-house. It's just part of it's now a chattel of the...
So they say, well, we'll give it to you, as the New York Yacht Club won't own the trophy. They'll be the custodians, the trustees of the cup, until someone else wins it.
Yeah.
Then they will become the trustees of it. That's the idea, right? So any recognised yacht club can challenge.
Yes.
The New York Yacht Club defends it until someone else wins it, and then they become a challenger, can become a challenger. That's the way it works. They decide to rename the cup after the boat that won it.
Is that right? I was wondering.
And that's how it becomes the America's Cup. It's named after the ship, not the country, or even though the ship's named after the country. So suddenly they go, here's this thing called the America's Cup. The transaction's formalised with a thing that becomes important, which is called a deed of gift, it's called. And what it does, it's actually registered with the New York Supreme Court. It becomes known as the deed. It lays out the terms and conditions that have to be met in order to challenge and race for the trophy. George Schuyler drafts them, and it says all the words. It's 374 words. It becomes very important later because every legal challenge to the America's Cup goes back to this deed. So what we've got at the end of all of this is a trophy called the America's Cup that is sitting there waiting to be challenged with rules around how to challenge for it, held by the New York Yacht Club.
We've established it.
The only problem we then have is by this time that this is all done, 1857 it's given. They write to every major yacht club in the world and say, this is a new competition. If you want to challenge, come challenge.
Any interest?
The only problem we have is the United States is on the cusp of civil war. Civil war breaks out. All the ships that are for racing or anything are basically bought by the Confederates or the Union to enforce the blockade. Yeah. And by the end of the Civil War, finishes in 1965, the America's Cup is completely forgotten. No one is thinking of yacht racing. No one remembers that before the war this is being set up. And so when we come back in the next episode, something happens to make the America's Cup suddenly come back to the forefront of everyone's minds.
And we're up and running. We've got the groundwork. We're good to go. This is fantastic. I am excited. I feel like we're on the cusp of a very exciting episode. Good on you, Titus. Thank you.